I installed sprinklers to keep kids off my lawn and the whole neighborhood turned against me. Angry moms called the cops, but you won't believe how it ended. I, Michael, 38M, have been living in my current house for about 4 years now. It's a nice corner property with a big front yard that faces a quiet street in a suburban neighborhood called Maplewood Estates. When I first moved in, I was excited about the spacious lawn and even considered setting up a small garden. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had kept the yard in immaculate condition, and I was eager to continue their legacy. My excitement about the property was amplified by the fact that this house represented a fresh start for me. I had just gone through a difficult divorce after 10 years of marriage, and the move to Maplewood Estates was supposed to be my chance to build a new life. I work as a freelance graphic designer, and I had set up a home office in the spare bedroom overlooking the front yard. The quiet neighborhood seemed perfect for my needs, or so I thought. For the first few months, everything was peaceful. I started to settle into a routine, working on my projects during the day and spending my evenings tending to the yard. I even planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the space for in my previous home. However, my tranquil new life was soon disrupted when summer vacation started. Suddenly, my front yard became the unofficial playground for what seemed like every kid in the neighborhood. At first, I didn't mind too much. Kids playing outside seemed harmless enough, and I remember how much fun I had playing with my friends when I was younger. I even felt a twinge of nostalgia watching them from my office window. But as the summer wore on, the situation started to get out of hand. It wasn't just a few kids anymore, it seemed like every child in a 5-block radius had decided that my lawn was the perfect spot for their daily games. They would play soccer, tag, and even set up makeshift obstacle courses using my garden ornaments. The noise level increased dramatically, making it difficult for me to concentrate on my work. I tried to be patient and understanding. I remembered how my own parents used to shoo us off their friends' lawns when we were kids, and I didn't want to be that grumpy neighbor. So, I started by gently asking the kids to keep the noise down or to play in other areas of the neighborhood. They would usually comply for a day or two, but then the cycle would start all over again. As summer turned to fall, I hoped the problem would resolve itself once school started. But to my dismay, my yard had apparently become the go-to spot for after-school play as well. The real issues started when I noticed the damage to my property. My carefully tended flower beds were trampled, my lawn was developing bald patches, and one of my garden gnomes, a cherished gift from my late grandmother, was knocked over and broken. The broken gnome was particularly upsetting. My grandmother had given it to me just before she passed away, knowing how much I admired her garden when I was a child. It was one of the few mementos I had of her, and seeing it in pieces on the lawn felt like losing a part of her all over again. I decided it was time to take a more direct approach. I reached out to some of the parents in the neighborhood. Most of them seemed understanding at first, promising to talk to their kids. I even invited a few of them over for coffee to discuss the issue in person. During these conversations, I learned that the neighborhood had always been very child-friendly, with most families having lived here for generations. They reminisced about their own childhood spent playing in each other's yards, and I could sense they were a bit puzzled by my concerns. Despite these conversations, nothing changed. If anything, the problem got worse. Now, when I'd ask the kids to leave, some would talk back disrespectfully or even make faces at me through the windows. I overheard one child refer to me as the mean divorced guy who hates fun, which stung more than I cared to admit. The situation was starting to affect my work. I had to reschedule client calls because of the noise outside, and I was falling behind on projects due to the constant distractions. I even considered renting an office space in town, but as a freelancer, the extra expense would have been a significant financial burden. Things came to a head last month when I caught a group of kids trying to climb the old oak tree in my yard. This tree was another reason I had fallen in love with the property. Its sprawling branches reminded me of the tree I used to climb at my grandparents' house. Not only were the kids at risk of falling and hurting themselves, but they were also damaging the tree's lower branches. That was the last straw for me. I spent several sleepless nights pondering what to do. I didn't want to call the police on children, but I felt like I was running out of options. That's when I remembered a story my uncle had told me about how he kept deer out of his vegetable garden, motion-activated sprinklers. After much consideration, I decided to install them around the perimeter of my lawn. I figured it was a harmless way to deter the kids without causing any real harm. The installation took a full weekend, and I have to admit, I felt a bit guilty as I set them up. But I reasoned that I had tried everything else, and this was a last resort. The first day after installation, I heard shrieks and laughter as the sprinklers caught the unsuspecting kids off guard. I watched from my office window as they ran off my lawn, soaking wet but seemingly more amused than upset. I thought that would be the end of it. But yesterday, I came home from a grocery run to find an angry mob of parents on my doorstep. Leading the charge was Karen, 42F, whose son Tyler, 11M, was apparently the ringleader of the yard invaders. She accused me of assaulting their children with the sprinklers and demanded that I remove them immediately. Another parent, Mike, 39M, threatened to report me to the Homeowners Association for disrupting the neighborhood's family-friendly atmosphere. I tried to explain my side of the story, but they wouldn't listen. One parent, Lisa, 37F, even threatened to sue me for endangering her daughter Emma, 9F, who apparently has a rare water allergy, which I'm pretty sure isn't a real thing. The confrontation quickly escalated, with parents talking over each other and some even suggesting that I should move out if I couldn't handle living in a family neighborhood. I stood my ground and refused to remove the sprinklers. I explained that I had tried multiple times to resolve this issue peacefully, but my concerns were ignored. I pointed out the damage to my yard, mentioned the broken family heirloom, and expressed my worries about potential injuries from kids climbing the tree. But my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The parents left in a huff, muttering about calling the homeowners association and the police. As I watched them disperse, I couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned my life in this new home. I had hoped to make friends with my neighbors, maybe even find a sense of community that I had lost after my divorce. Instead, I found myself at odds with everyone around me. Now I'm wondering if I went too far. The sprinklers seem like a reasonable solution to me, but the parents' reactions have me second-guessing myself. Am I really the bad guy here? Should I have just accepted that my yard would be the neighborhood playground? Or do I have the right to protect my property and privacy? So, Reddit, IDA for installing motion-activated sprinklers to keep the neighborhood kids off my lawn? Update 1. It's been about 2 weeks since my original post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their input and advice. It really helped me gain some perspective on the situation and gave me the courage to stand my ground. The day after my confrontation with the angry parents, I received a visit from 2 police officers. Apparently, Karen had indeed called them, claiming I was attacking children with high-pressure water cannons. I have to admit, my heart sank when I saw the patrol car pull up. As someone who's always tried to stay on the right side of the law, the idea of being in trouble with the police was terrifying. I invited the officers in and calmly explained the situation. I showed them around my property, pointing out the damage to the lawn and flower beds. I even showed them the broken pieces of my grandmother's gnome, which I had carefully collected and was trying to glue back together. Then I demonstrated the sprinkler system, which is just a standard lawn sprinkler, nothing like the high-pressure water cannons Karen had described. To my immense relief, the officers were understanding. Officer Johnson, 45M, even chuckled and said he wished he'd thought of sprinklers when he had trouble with teenagers loitering in front of his house. His partner, Officer Martinez, 38F, advised me to put up no trespassing signs to further strengthen my position legally. They agreed that I had the right to protect my property and that the sprinklers pose no real danger to anyone. Before leaving, Officer Johnson pulled me aside and shared some personal advice. He mentioned that he'd gone through a divorce a few years back and understood how hard it could be to adjust to a new community, especially one as tight-knit as Maplewood Estates. He suggested that I try to find ways to connect with my neighbors that didn't involve confrontation. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to know that someone understood where I was coming from. Encouraged by this interaction, I decided to take a more proactive approach. I spent the next day designing and printing out flyers explaining why I had installed the sprinklers. I detailed the damage that had been done to my property, expressed my concerns about potential injuries, and included a bit about my work-from-home situation. I also added a personal touch, mentioning my grandmother's broken gnome and what it meant to me. At the bottom, I included my phone number, inviting parents to discuss the matter with me directly if they had any issues. Distributing these flyers was an experience in itself. Some neighbors slammed their doors in my face, while others reluctantly took the flyer without making eye contact. But there were a few who seemed genuinely interested in hearing my side of the story. The response over the next few days was mixed. Some parents called to apologize for their children's behavior and promised to keep a closer eye on them. Mrs. Thompson, 68F, who lives across the street, even brought over a plate of homemade cookies and shared stories about how she used to struggle with neighborhood kids trampling her prize-winning roses. It was nice to know I wasn't alone in my frustrations. Others remained hostile. Mike, who had threatened to report me to the HOA, left an angry voicemail accusing me of overreacting and ruining the neighborhood spirit. Karen started a Facebook group called Save Maplewood's Children from the Sprinkler Menace, which would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. One interaction stood out from the rest. My next-door neighbor, Sarah, 42F, came over with her son Ethan, 10M. I was wary at first, remembering how Ethan had been one of the main culprits in the yard invasions. But to my surprise, Ethan sheepishly admitted that he had been one of the kids climbing my tree and apologized. Sarah explained that she had no idea things had gotten so out of hand and offered to help organize a neighborhood meeting to discuss the issue. I was hesitant at first. The idea of facing all those angry parents in one room was daunting. But Sarah was persistent, arguing that open communication was the only way to resolve this conflict. She even offered to act as a mediator, given her experience as a school counselor. After some consideration, I agreed, and we set up a meeting at the local community center for the following weekend. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. I overheard whispers when I went to check my mail, and the neighborhood kids gave my house a wide berth, as if the sprinklers might suddenly come to life and chase them down the street. I spent hours preparing what I wanted to say, trying to find a way to express my frustrations without coming across as the villain they all seemed to think I was. When the day of the meeting arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. Sarah picked me up, sensing that I might lose my nerve if left to my own devices. The community center was packed when we arrived. It seemed like every parent in Maplewood Estates had turned up, along with a few kids and even some of the older residents. The meeting was tense at first. Some parents were still angry about the sprinklers, while others seemed embarrassed by their children's behavior. Karen kicked things off with a dramatic speech about the terror her son had experienced when he got sprayed with water. I had to bite my tongue to keep from pointing out that this same traumatized kid had been laughing and trying to dodge the sprinklers just days later. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and tried to channel the calm, rational tone I use with difficult clients. I presented my side of the story, showing photos of the damage to my property and explaining how it had affected my work and peace of mind. I shared the story of my grandmother's gnome, passing around a picture of it before it was broken. I could see some faces softening as I spoke, particularly among the older residents. To my surprise, as I spoke, I noticed several parents nudging their kids and giving them pointed looks. It seemed that many of the children hadn't been entirely truthful about their activities on my lawn. A few kids even raised their hands to apologize, admitting that they had taken things too far. The turning point came when old Mrs. Jenkins, 78F, stood up. She's lived in the neighborhood for over 50 years and is generally respected by everyone. She backed up my story, saying she'd witnessed the kids' rowdy behavior from her window and had been meaning to say something for weeks. She also shared some choice words about how children these days lack respect for private property, which made a few parents shift uncomfortably in their seats. After Mrs. Jenkins spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted. More parents started to come around, admitting that they should have taken my concerns more seriously. We ended up having a productive discussion about designating safe play areas for the kids and the importance of respecting private property. By the end of the meeting, we had come up with a plan. The parents agreed to be more vigilant about where their kids were playing, and I agreed to turn off the sprinklers for a 2-week trial period. We also decided to look into the possibility of converting a nearby vacant lot into a proper playground for the neighborhood kids. As people were leaving, Lisa, the mother who had threatened to sue me over her daughter Emma's water allergy, approached me. She apologized for her behavior, admitting that she had overreacted out of embarrassment when Emma came home soaking wet. We ended up having a good laugh about it, and she invited me to her book club, saying they could use a male perspective. I left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. The kids have been noticeably absent from my lawn this past week, and I've even seen some parents calling their children in when they start to wander onto my property. It's not perfect, but it's progress. I'll keep the sprinklers turned off for now and see how things go. Fingers crossed that this peace lasts. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and I wanted to share some surprising developments in the great sprinkler saga of Maplewood Estates. The 2-week trial period without the sprinklers went better than expected. Most of the kids stayed off my lawn, and when a few forgot and wandered over, their friends would quickly remind them. It was a refreshing change, and I started to feel more relaxed in my own home. I was even able to make some headway on a big project I'd been struggling with, designing a new logo for a local business. However, just as I was beginning to think the problem was solved, things took an unexpected turn. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find my front yard transformed. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. Someone had scattered dozens of pinwheels across the lawn, each one spinning merrily in the breeze. Colorful chalk drawings covered my driveway, depicting everything from hopscotch grids to elaborate fantasy landscapes. My first reaction was anger. This felt like a violation of the agreement we'd made at the neighborhood meeting. I stormed out of the house, ready to confront whoever was responsible. But as I stepped outside to assess the damage, I noticed something odd. None of the pinwheels were actually planted in the ground, they were all carefully balanced on top of the grass. The chalk drawings, while numerous, were confined to the driveway and sidewalk, not touching the actual lawn. As I stood there, confused, I heard giggling from behind a nearby bush. A group of kids, led by Ethan, my neighbor Sarah's son, emerged. They looked nervous but excited. Ethan stepped forward, clutching a piece of paper that I recognized as one of my flyers from a few weeks ago. Ethan explained that they had read my flyer and realized how much damage they had caused. They wanted to show me that they could have fun without hurting my property. The pinwheels were their way of decorating without damaging the grass, and they had specifically used chalk that would wash away with the next rain. I was touched by their thoughtfulness. It was clear that they had put a lot of effort into this surprise. The other kids chimed in, pointing out their favorite drawings and explaining the imaginary worlds they had created on my driveway. One little girl, Emma, yes, the one with the alleged water allergy, shyly handed me a drawing she had made of my grandmother's gnome, surrounded by flowers and smiling pinwheels. Sarah appeared from her house, looking a bit anxious. She admitted that she had supervised the whole operation, making sure the kids respected my property while allowing them to express their creativity. She handed me a basket full of homemade cookies, a peace offering from the neighborhood parents. This gesture led to an impromptu block party. Other parents and kids, seeing us all in my front yard, came over to investigate. Soon, my previously off-limits lawn became the center of a neighborhood gathering. Parents brought out folding chairs and snacks, kids played gentle games that didn't involve trampling the grass, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I felt like part of the community. As the day went on, I found myself sharing stories about my graphic design work. The kids were fascinated by the idea of creating logos and illustrations, and soon I was giving an impromptu art lesson using the sidewalk chalk. Even Karen, who had been my most vocal critic, seemed impressed when I showed her some of my designs on my tablet. As the impromptu party wound down and I helped clean up the chalk drawings, which were indeed easy to wash away, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently things had turned out from what I'd expected. What started as a conflict had somehow turned into the beginning of new friendships and a stronger sense of community. The next day, Sarah came over with a proposal from the parents. They suggested setting up a rotating schedule where each weekend, a different yard in the neighborhood would become the designated play area. This way, the kids would have variety in their play spaces, and no single yard would bear the brunt of the wear and tear. I was hesitant at first, memories of trampled flower beds still fresh in my mind. But seeing how respectful everyone had been the day before changed my perspective. I agreed to be part of the rotation, with the condition that certain areas of my yard, like my grandmother's restored gnome garden, would remain off limits. The kids were thrilled with this compromise. They even offered to help me set up a small vegetable garden in one corner of my yard, which they promised to help tend as part of their science class project. Ethan, who had become something of a regular visitor, suggested we could donate the vegetables to the local food bank. As I write this update, I'm sitting in my home office, looking out at my yard. The grass is growing back where it was trampled, and the flower beds are starting to bloom again. The sprinklers are still there, but they haven't been activated in weeks. Instead, they've become a source of amusement for the neighborhood kids, who try to run through the yard without setting them off, a game they've dubbed Sprinkler Ninja. I'm still keeping the sprinklers, though. Just in case. Old habits die hard, I guess. Update 3, it's been 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have progressed in our neighborhood. The rotating play yard schedule has been a huge success. Every weekend, a different house becomes the neighborhood hotspot, complete with games, snacks, and plenty of adult supervision. It's brought our community closer together in ways I never expected. When it was my turn to host, I was nervous at first. But with the help of Sarah and a few other neighbors, we turned my yard into a mini carnival. We set up bean-bag tosses, a balloon pop game, and even a small bouncy castle, rental split between several families. The kids had a blast, and everything was cleaned up and back to normal by Sunday evening. The vegetable garden project with the kids has been a particular highlight. We planted tomatoes, cucumbers, and various herbs. The children have been diligent about watering and weeding, and their excitement when we harvested our first tomatoes was infectious. We even had a neighborhood salad party using vegetables from our garden. An unexpected development came when Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly lady who spoke up for me at the community meeting, invited me over for tea. She revealed that she's been considering moving to a retirement community, as maintaining her large property has become difficult in her old age. However, seeing how our neighborhood has come together gave her an idea. She proposed converting her spacious backyard into a proper community playground and garden. The idea quickly gained traction. A committee was formed to work out the details, and I found myself nominated as the project coordinator, given my experience in conflict resolution. Their words, not mine. We're still in the planning stages, but the enthusiasm is overwhelming. Local businesses have offered to donate materials, parents are volunteering their skills, we've got a landscape architect and a carpenter in the mix, and the kids are bubbling with ideas for what they want in their new play space. Mrs. Jenkins will retain ownership of the property, but we're setting up a neighborhood association to manage and maintain the new community area. She gets to stay in her home with the assurance that her legacy will live on in the laughter of children for years to come. As for my yard, it's returned to its former tranquility. The sprinklers have been repurposed as part of an irrigation system for our expanding community garden project. My grandmother's gnomes now preside over a thriving herb garden, tended to by a rotating group of junior gardeners. Looking back, I never could have imagined that my frustration over a trampled lawn would lead to such positive changes in our neighborhood. It's been a lesson in communication, compromise, and community spirit. And to think, it all started with a few well-placed sprinklers.